Hey, what's up, everybody? And welcome to 2017's last episode of the Mastering Mentorship podcast. Boy, has this been a year. I was just going through my notebook and looking at all the changes that have happened. And this year alone, I quit a job. I went full-time at Dale Carnegie. I grew my business. I started 2 podcasts. I sampled things like vlogging and some other things. I celebrated a 10-year anniversary with my wife. I moved across town. I made a lot of new friends. I lost touch with other people. I brought on 2 new team members into my business, one of them being my wife, which has been the best decision that I have ever or could ever make short of marrying that woman. The other person is someone that came on recently that I actually haven't even announced yet. His name is Josh, and he's an absolute rock star. And I'm really excited to bring him on to not only help him get into the business, but also to help impact even more people in the Raleigh market and the surrounding areas for Dale Carnegie and the life-changing experience that I'm able to facilitate. Because I got an opportunity to take that program back in 2011, and it fundamentally changed my life. So I wanted to talk a little bit about 2018. A lot of people set resolutions and they do all of these things, and the truth is I've never been really good at keeping my resolutions, so I stopped quite a while ago and decided to sort of create new practices or use it as a time of reflection and an opportunity to make some changes. My wife instituted this thing called Dry January, which essentially started out being just having no alcohol for January as a way to kind of reset ourselves. And what we found is it's really been an opportunity for us to interrogate our year, interrogate our habits, our practices, the things that we do, and to really think about what's the best thing for our family, for our production, for what we need spiritually, what we need emotionally, what we need physically. And so Dry January is something that'll happen for me this year. And then I've set some other goals for my year. One of the things, and this has been really interesting to have this conversation, especially inside of my business ecosystem. Most people set revenue goals for their year, and I'm no different. I've got a mortgage to pay and a 6-year-old that will probably want to go to college one day, and she'll probably want to get married, and I will likely be on the hook for both of those expenses, and I will be happy to pay for both of those, and I have to do some things to make sure I'm in a position to do that one day. And so there's revenue that's needed for 2018. Revenue, though, is going to be a symptom of a greater thing. And so instead of revenue goals this year for my business, I've set people goals. And so last year, a couple hundred people came through the Dale Carnegie programs in my area. And this year, I've set a goal of 300 Dale Carnegie experiences that I would like to give. Additionally, there'll be, I would like to give 12 to 24 keynote talks, which are not the most important thing when I look at impact. I find that the impact of people being engaged in a more long-form experiential training and coaching environment certainly gives a better impact for obvious reasons. And so that's the primary goal, is 300 people to have a Dale Carnegie experience this year in my market. And I know that if I hit that, then the revenue takes care of itself. And in fact, it blows away the revenue goal that I would have set. So that's the first thing. And the other things are things like listening or reading 12 books. That's one a month that I'm responsible for. Being consistent on content, things like this podcast, things like the podcast I have with Mark Kinsley, the Off the Top podcast, writing, sharing, giving as much content as I possibly can. Things like, I mentioned Josh before, things like bringing him into the business and giving him the best chance to succeed, and spending the time that I need to spend with him to make sure that our partnership and our relationship grows and develops. And then, it's kind of a broad stroke, but to say, to be spiritually and physically stronger at the end of this year, at the end of 2018, than I am right now. And so those are kind of the goals. The problem I find, though, is we tend to get lost. Like January 1st, we wake up, we've got these goals, these things we want to change, these extreme measures that we want to take, and we start to take them. And by February 1st, nothing's really changed, and we're kind of back to our old ways. And so I was thinking about how to make my resolutions stick. Like, what can I do, and what have I learned from other people, from my experience, other things that have sort of mentored me, or other people that have mentored me? What are some of the top and most important things that I should be thinking about that will help me to maintain these goals through 2018? So here's a few things I came up with. The first thing, and this is something I've learned from multiple people, one of those people, in fact, is Jason Goldberg, who was just on the podcast. He was on the last episode called Are You Serious? And the principle is be kind to yourself. And so one of the things that I've struggled with, and perhaps you've struggled with this in the past as well, is you'll set a goal, or you'll set an intention, or you'll set a resolution, and then you'll mess up. Like, I'm going to eat better, and then 2 days later it's 10:30 and you're eating Oreos. And so you feel awful about yourself, you beat yourself up, you tell yourself how ridiculous and how stupid and how lazy, or how you can't keep a promise even to yourself. And so then you end up just completely like forgetting about it. That doesn't really serve the purpose. It doesn't serve you. It doesn't help. And so one of the things that Jason taught me is the value of being kind to yourself. And when you make a mistake, first of all, you have to allow yourself to make the mistake. And then once you've made the mistake, just notice it. Just notice the mistake and then make an adjustment. And don't expect perfection out of yourself, because you already know it's 2017 and you can already guarantee yourself and everyone else around you that you will not be perfect in 2018. So do not hold yourself to a standard that you cannot possibly meet. And that's something that I have to continuously remind myself, is I can't hold myself to a standard that not even I could possibly meet. And so when I make a mistake, I have to be willing to notice it. That doesn't mean like act like it doesn't happen. Like, I have to notice, I have to see it, I have to point at it, I have to take accountability for it and say, yes, I messed that up, I screwed that up, I shouldn't do that. If it's relational, I have to be willing to go have the conversation, go apologize. If it's not relational, then I have to be willing to just come out to myself and say, yeah, I screwed that up and I made a mistake. And then once I've admitted it, I have to be willing to simply adjust and to not beat myself up. Which leads me to the second thing. And this is a Dale Carnegie principle. In fact, in my Dale Carnegie programs, I teach 30 principles. One of those principles, the first one, and some might say the most important, is don't criticize, condemn, or complain. And as much, if I know anything, I know that my attitude creates my reality. And what that means is that the things that I dwell on are typically the things that come to pass. So when I'm thinking about positive things usually end up happening. And when I'm thinking about negative things end up happening. It's almost like a self-fulfilled prophecy. And when I'm criticizing, when I'm condemning, or when I'm complaining about other people, people tend to let me down an awful lot. But when I stop and I allow people to be people, I allow them to be imperfect, I allow them to make mistakes, and I give grace freely to other people, it tends to really make my life better. I'm less stressed, I'm more happy. And in the same breath, when I choose to not criticize, condemn, or complain to myself about myself, I tend to be a lot happier as well. And I think that really goes both ways. And I believe for me, it starts with how I'm talking to myself. If I'm critical of myself, if I condemn myself, if I complain about the things that I do, I'm much more likely to criticize, to condemn, and complain other people. And so knowing that we create our reality, and our reality really starts with the things that we think about and the things that we dwell on. The less we criticize, the less we condemn, and the less we complain, the better off we're going to be long term. And then the third thing may seem really simple, but the implications are huge. And this is also a principle. One of the 30 principles is principle 5 in Dale Carnegie's 30 principles. And it's simply smile. And, a lot of people will hear that principle and think, yeah, like, I got that. Like, are you kidding? Like, is smile really a principle? Like, do we really need to talk about the value? Like, we already know that. Like, check the box. Let's move on. And I think what I have in the past, what I've overlooked and what other people tend to overlook as well, is what a smile actually is. A smile is an outer sign of an inner state. An outer sign of an inner state, which means that a smile is letting the world around me know that I have a positive disposition, that I'm approachable, that I'm happy, that I'm kind, that I don't criticize, condemn, or complain, that I create and I am a safe environment. And like, we've all known the person that, when they walk into the room just like lights up. Things get better. The environment is more fun. It's more free. It's more open. It's more inclusive. It's more healthy. And we've also known the person who brightens the room when they leave it. And typically, that's the person that does not do the 3 things that are suggested here, which is to smile, which means have a positive inner disposition that gives an outer sign, which is the actual smile. Those people do not, they constantly not only criticize, condemn, and complain to themselves about themselves, they also criticize, condemn, and complain other people, and then they're generally not kind to themselves. And I think that every one of us have the option to be able to choose what type of person we're going to be, how we're going to show up. We all have different versions of ourselves. There's versions of me that show up when I'm with my family. There's a version of me that shows up when I have to sit and wait at the DMV. There's a version of me that shows up at church. There's a version of me that shows up at guys' night, right? And so we all have different versions of us that show up at different times depending on our circumstance. And the power in knowing that is that we can choose the version of ourselves that's going to show up. We can choose our disposition. We can choose how we think about things. We can choose the story that we're telling ourselves about our circumstance or our relationships or the people who happen to be around us in any particular moment. We can make those choices. And if we can make those choices, then that means that we can set ourselves on a path. We can set ourselves on a course for this coming year where we can actually not only achieve some goals, but we can be consistent in the progression of becoming the most valuable and the best version of who we are already. Because oftentimes it's not so much about are we willing to become someone new or renew ourselves. Oftentimes it's are we willing to just be the best version of who we already are. Like, it's already in there. And the question is are we willing to do the work? Are we willing to zoom out? Are we really willing to take a new perspective? Stop making excuses. Be kind to ourselves. Stop criticizing. Stop condemning. Stop complaining. And just smile. And I think if we do that, we're much more likely to be able to meet the goals that we're setting for ourselves so that we can have the outcomes that we actually want to have when we get to December 31st of next year, of 2018. So a few of the practices, I believe that if you're going to make a big goal, you also have to make some small goals so that you can get to the big goal. So I mentioned some of my goals in the very beginning. Some of the practices, the daily practices that I plan to do to help me to actually get there are things like journaling. I started about 2 months ago making an attempt to journal every day for about 10 minutes or so. I'll spend a little bit of time, quiet time. I'll read a passage from the Bible. I'll read a passage from a book called The Daily Stoic. And then I'll spend about 10 minutes of reflection, and usually that reflection works out better for me if I'm writing it down. And I tried meditating. I was not good at it. And so I felt as though I needed to do something. So the writing is kind of a data dump. And so whatever that looks like for you, what I do may not work for you, and what you do may not work for me, and that's okay. The point is finding a practice that works, that centers us and gives us an opportunity to really take a realistic perspective on what's actually going on, and not to overthink it or overanalyze it or get stuck. Another thing that I plan to do is make a daily intention. So at the end of this practice, at the end of reading, at the end of journaling, I'd make a daily intention. And that intention has 3 different elements. The first element is a practical element, meaning there has to be something that I can do today in regard to that particular thing. So if I'm thinking about or reading about or meditating on or writing about becoming a better husband, for instance, there has to be something that I can do that day with Meredith, for Meredith, to be able to demonstrate that learning, so that I can have not only have a intellectual understanding of what I want to know and what I believe, also I can have a physical experience with it, which helps me to make the connection between the physical and the spiritual. And those are the other 2 things. So there has to be a practicality to the intention, and then there has to be a physical element to the intention, and then there has to be a spiritual implication to that particular intention. And I believe that that is something, over the last 2 months anyway, has really been a tremendous help in centering me and helping me to see what I wanted to do, how I wanted to do it, to not be as stressed, to be a better version of myself, and to be sort of a more evolved version of ultimately who I would like to be, not only for myself, but for the people that are in my life and who will come into my life in 2018. So I encourage you, if you haven't subscribed to this podcast, we will be posting a episode once a week through 2018, starting next week. And also, if you haven't subscribed to the Off the Top podcast with me and Mark Kinsley, that is just so much fun. It's so much fun to jam with him we try weekly. Sometimes it doesn't work out, so it can be a little more sporadic. But that is such a fun podcast. I think you'll enjoy it. So subscribe to that. If you have an extra second, review both of them. I'd love to hear from you. If you have any thoughts, suggestions, topics, questions, I know one thing for sure, which is that I don't have all the answers, and that is why I do these podcasts, because this is me working through and fighting through and grappling with a lot of the questions that I have. And so if I can help you discover, help you find, or hold space on this podcast for you, it would certainly be my honor. So as we're wrapping up 2017, so many cool things going on, so much need, so much opportunity. my hope for you is that you find space, you set goals, that you're kind to yourself, you're kind to others, you don't criticize yourself, you don't criticize others, and that simply 2018 will bring a smile to your face. God bless you. Thank you for jamming with me in 2017, and here is to the best 2018 of all time. See you next year, folks.